The marriage contract arrived on a Tuesday morning in July 1878, and Felicity Kincaid's hands trembled so violently she could barely read the elegant script that spelled out her fate in black ink and legal terminology that made her stomach turn. Her father had been dead only 3 weeks, killed in a mining accident that left nothing but debt and broken promises. And now the banker who held those debts stood in her modest parlor with a smile that did not reach his cold eyes. Mortimer Graves was 52 years old with thinning hair and fingers that drummed impatiently on his leather satchel, and he explained in a voice devoid of compassion that she had 2 choices. She could marry him and settle her father's considerable debts through that union, or she could lose everything, including the small house that had been her home for 20 years, and face destitution on the unforgiving streets of Piach, Nevada. Felicity was 21 years old with auburn hair that caught the desert sunlight and green eyes that had once sparkled with dreams of adventure and love. But those dreams seemed childish now, as she stared at the contract that reduced her entire existence to collateral. The mining town of Piach sprawled across the high desert landscape, with its rough wooden buildings and dusty streets, a place where fortunes were made and lost on the strength of silver veins running through the mountains, and where a woman alone had few options and fewer friends. "I need your answer by Friday," Mortimer said, adjusting his spectacles as he studied her face with the same calculating expression he probably used when appraising property. "The contract is quite generous, considering your circumstances. You will have a home, security, and I expect very little from you beyond the duties of a wife." The way he said those last words made her skin crawl, but she forced herself to nod and show him to the door. When he left, she sank into her father's old chair and let the tears come, hot and bitter against her cheeks. Her father had been a good man but a foolish one, always chasing the next big strike, always certain that prosperity waited just around the corner. He had borrowed heavily from Mortimer Graves to fund his mining ventures, and now his daughter would pay the price. She had no family left, no one to turn to for help. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and her father had never remarried, pouring all his love and hope into his only child and his impossible dreams of striking it rich. Felicity had worked as a seamstress to help make ends meet, but her modest income would never be enough to satisfy the debts that hung over her head like a thundercloud. That evening, she sat at her small kitchen table and read through the contract again, each word feeling like a nail in her coffin. The terms were clear and merciless. By signing, she would become Mortimer Graves' wife, and all her possessions and future earnings would belong to him. He would assume her father's debts, and in return, she would be bound to him until death parted them. There was a clause near the end that caught her eye, written in smaller script. The contract itself could be transferred or sold to another party at Mortimer's discretion, as if she were nothing more than a piece of property to be traded. The thought made her ill, but she did not see a way out. Friday was only 3 days away, and she had nowhere to run, no money to start over somewhere new. Piach was all she knew, and even if she fled, Mortimer Graves had connections throughout Nevada. He would find her and make her life even more miserable. She barely slept that night, tossing and turning as moonlight streamed through her bedroom window and painted silver patterns on the walls. She thought about her father and how proud he had been when he told her about his latest prospect, his eyes shining with excitement. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself, filled with laughter and children and a husband who loved her, not one who saw her as a debt to be collected. Wednesday morning arrived with brutal desert heat that shimmered off the dirt roads and made the air feel thick and heavy. Felicity dressed in her simplest calico dress and walked into town, needing to feel the sun on her face and the movement of her own feet, anything to distract herself from the decision that loomed before her. The main street was busy with miners and merchants, with women carrying baskets and children darting between the buildings. She passed the saloon where piano music drifted through the swinging doors, past the general store where the owner's wife gave her a sympathetic look that suggested the whole town knew about her predicament. She was about to turn back toward home when she heard raised voices coming from outside the land office. A crowd had gathered, and curiosity drew her closer. Two men stood facing each other in the dusty street, their postures tense and confrontational. One was Mortimer Graves, his face red with anger. The other was a cowboy she had never seen before, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat. He wore dusty trail clothes and a black hat pushed back on his head, and there was something in his stance that spoke of confidence and barely contained power. "You have no right to interfere in my business dealings," Mortimer was saying, his voice sharp and loud enough to carry. "That land is mine, and the contract is legal." "Legal does not always mean right," the cowboy replied, and his voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas or further south. "You are taking advantage of people who are desperate, buying up their claims for a fraction of what they are worth." "I am a businessman," Mortimer snapped. "If they were foolish enough to borrow money they could not repay, that is not my concern. The law is on my side." The cowboy's jaw tightened, and Felicity found herself unable to look away from his face. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with strong features and blue eyes that seemed to see right through Mortimer's bluster. There was something honest about him, something that made her want to trust him even though she knew nothing about who he was or where he came from. "The law," the cowboy said quietly, "should protect people, not crush them." Mortimer laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You are new here, so let me educate you about how things work in Piotch. Money makes the rules, and I have plenty of it. If you are smart, you will stay out of my way." He turned and stalked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The crowd began to disperse, people murmuring to each other as they returned to their daily business. Felicity stood frozen, watching as the cowboy removed his hat and wiped his brow with his forearm. Their eyes met across the dispersing crowd, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition that neither could explain. He walked toward her, and she felt her heart begin to race. Up close, he was even more striking, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow and hands that looked strong and capable. He nodded politely and said, "Madam, I apologize if that scene disturbed you. I am afraid I have a habit of speaking my mind, even when it would be wiser to stay silent." "You were right, though," she heard herself say, "about what you said to him. Mortimer Graves does take advantage of people. He has been doing it for years." The cowboy's expression softened. "You know him?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Everyone in Piotch knows Mortimer Graves. He owns half the town and holds debts on most of the rest." "Including you?" The question was gentle but direct, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. She should have walked away, should have kept her troubles to herself, but something about this stranger made her want to unburden herself. "My father died recently. He owed Mortimer a great deal of money. Now Mortimer has offered me a way to settle those debts." Understanding flickered in those blue eyes. "A marriage contract." She nodded, surprised that he had guessed so quickly. "How did you know?" "I have seen it before, in other towns. Men like Graves use the law as a weapon, forcing people into situations where they have no choice." He paused, then extended his hand. "My name is Yates Zimmerman. I am new to Piotch, but I came here with some money saved and a desire to start fresh." I worked cattle drives for the past 8 years and I am tired of the trail. I thought I might settle down, maybe buy some land and build something permanent. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his grip. Felicity Kincaid. It is nice to meet you, Mr. Zimmerman, even under these circumstances. Call me Yates, he said, and his smile transformed his face, making him look younger and less weathered. Mr. Zimmerman was my father, and he has been dead for 10 years. They stood there in the hot sun, two strangers connected by a chance encounter and a shared distaste for injustice. Felicity knew she should excuse herself and return home, but she found herself reluctant to leave. There was something about Yates Zimmerman that drew her, something beyond his physical presence. He seemed like a man who kept his word, who stood up for what was right even when it cost him. "When do you have to give Graves your answer?" Yates asked. "Friday. 2 days from now." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant as if he were working through a complex problem. Then he looked at her directly and said, "What if there were another way? What if someone else paid off your father's debts? Would that free you from the marriage contract?" She blinked, confused. "I suppose so, but I do not understand. Who would do such a thing?" "I would," he said simply. "I have money saved enough to cover substantial debts. If I paid what your father owed, you would not have to marry Graves." Felicity felt dizzy, as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "But why?" "You do not know me. We just met." "Because it is the right thing to do," Yates said. "And because no woman should be forced into marriage like a piece of property being sold." She wanted to accept, wanted to throw her arms around this stranger and weep with relief, but caution held her back. "I cannot ask you to do that. It would be too much, and I would have no way to repay you." "I am not asking for repayment," he said. "Consider it a gift or an investment in doing something good." There had to be a catch, some hidden condition that would make this offer just as bad as Mortimer's contract. "What do you want from me in return?" Yates smiled again, and this time there was something sad in it. "Nothing that you are not willing to give freely. If you want to repay me someday when you are able, that would be fine. If not, I will survive. I just hate to see Graves get his way, especially at the expense of someone who deserves better." She studied his face, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but all she saw was sincerity. It seemed impossible, like something from a fairy tale, but she was desperate and running out of time. "If you are serious about this, I would be grateful beyond words. My father owed Mortimer $3,000. Yates let out a low whistle. "That is a considerable sum, but I can manage it. I have been saving for a long time, and I have more than enough to cover it and still have funds left to start my new life here." "Why would you give up so much for a stranger?" He looked away, toward the mountains that rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the brilliant blue sky. "My mother was in a similar situation once when I was just a boy. My father died, and she was left with debts and no way to pay them. A man offered to help her, asked for nothing in return except that she pass the kindness along someday. She taught me that we should help others when we can, especially when they are vulnerable. I have the means to help you, so I will." Tears stung Felicity's eyes, but they were different from the bitter tears she had cried the day before. These were tears of hope, of relief, of gratitude so profound she could barely speak. "I do not know what to say. Thank you seems inadequate." "Thank you is enough," Yates said. "Now, where do I find Mortimer Graves? I think it is time I made him a business proposition he cannot refuse." They walked together to the bank, a sturdy brick building that stood out among the wooden structures that dominated Piatch. Inside, the air was cooler, and the teller looked up in surprise when Felicity and Yates approached. She asked to see Mortimer, and after a brief wait they were ushered into his private office. Mortimer sat behind an imposing desk, and his expression darkened when he saw Yates. "What is the meaning of this? Miss Kincaid, I thought we had an understanding." "We did," Felicity said, her voice stronger than she felt. "But circumstances have changed." Yates stepped forward and placed a leather pouch on the desk. The heavy clink of coins was unmistakable. "I am here to purchase the debt owed by Richard Kincaid's estate, $3,000, I believe. Here is $3,200. The extra is for your trouble." Mortimer stared at the pouch as if it were a snake that might bite him. "This is highly irregular. The debt is connected to a marriage contract." "A contract that has not yet been signed," Yates said. "According to the law, the debt stands separate from the contract. If the debt is paid, the contract becomes void. Or are you telling me that you intend to hold Miss Kincaid to an agreement based on a debt that no longer exists?" The banker's face went through several shades of red and purple. He clearly wanted to refuse, but the money sat there on his desk, more than enough to cover what was owed. To refuse would make him look petty and potentially expose him to legal challenges. "I want to see proof that you have the funds." Yates opened the pouch and poured out a stream of gold coins and bank notes. "Count it if you like. It is all there." Mortimer's hands shook slightly as he counted the money, his lips moving silently. When he finished, he looked up at Felicity with an expression of pure spite. "You do realize what you are throwing away. I could have given you a comfortable life." "You are going to trap me in a loveless marriage," Felicity said, and her voice did not waver. "That is not comfort. That is a prison." Mortimer transferred his glare to Yates. "And you, Cowboy? Do you think buying her debt makes her yours? Are you any better than me?" "The difference," Yates said quietly, "is that I am giving her a choice. The debt is paid. She owes nothing to anyone. What she does with her freedom is entirely up to her." Mortimer pulled out the marriage contract and, with visible reluctance, wrote "void" across the top in large letters. He shoved it across the desk toward Felicity. "Take it. You are free of your obligation, but do not come crying to me when you realize what you have given up." Felicity picked up the voided contract with trembling hands. She had been prepared to sacrifice everything, and now, because of a stranger's kindness, she had her life back. She and Yates left the bank together, stepping out into the bright sunlight that felt different now, warmer and more welcoming. "I cannot believe what just happened," she said, her voice breathless. "You really did it. You bought my freedom." "I paid a debt," Yates corrected. "Your freedom was always yours. Graves just tried to take it from you." They walked slowly down the street, both seeming reluctant to part ways. Felicity's mind was spinning with questions and emotions. She wanted to know everything about this man who had changed her life with a single act of generosity. "Will you stay in Piotch?" "That was my plan," he said. "I was looking at some land east of town before I had my run-in with Graves. There is a small ranch for sale, nothing fancy, but it has good grazing land and water rights. I thought I might try my hand at raising horses." "That sounds wonderful," she said, and meant it. "After years on cattle drives, you must want to put down roots." "I do," he admitted. "I am tired of sleeping on the ground and eating dust. I want a place that is mine, where I can build something that lasts." They reached Felicity's house, and she hesitated at the gate. "Would you like to come in? I could make coffee and we could talk more." "I feel like I owe you more than just a quick thank you on the street." Yates smiled. "I would like that very much." Inside, Felicity busied herself with making coffee while Yates looked around the modest parlor. The house was small but clean, with curtains she had sewn herself and furniture that had seen better days but was well cared for. She brought out cups and a plate of biscuits she had baked the day before, when she had been trying to distract herself from thoughts of the contract. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, and the conversation flowed easily. Yates told her about his life on the trail, about the vast herds of cattle he had helped drive from Texas to railheads in Kansas and Colorado. He spoke about the men he had worked with, some good and some not, about stampedes and river crossings and nights spent under stars so thick they looked like spilled sugar across a black tablecloth. Felicity told him about growing up in Piach, about her father's endless optimism and her mother's memory that she carried like a precious jewel. She told him about her work as a seamstress, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from simple cloth and thread. She found herself laughing at Yates' stories and feeling more relaxed than she had in weeks. Hours passed without either of them noticing. The sun moved across the sky and shadows lengthened in the corners of the room. Finally, Yates stood and said, "I should go. I am staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street, and I need to finalize the purchase of that ranch before someone else snaps it up." Felicity walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. "Yates, I still do not know how to thank you properly. What you did today changed my entire life." He turned to face her, and in the golden afternoon light, his eyes seemed impossibly blue. "Seeing you free from graves is thanks enough, but if you want to repay me someday, maybe you could help me with something." "Anything," she said without hesitation. "I am going to need curtains for that ranch house," he said with a grin, "and I have no talent whatsoever for sewing. Maybe when you have time you could help me make the place feel like a home," she smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I would be happy to. It is the least I can do." He tipped his hat and walked away, and she stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared around a corner. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the flutter in her stomach, the quickening of her pulse that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way his smile made her feel seen and valued. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Yates completed the purchase of the ranch, a property that included a sturdy house, a barn, and 200 acres of decent grazing land. Felicity visited several times to take measurements for curtains and to offer suggestions about how to arrange the furniture and where to plant a garden. Each visit stretched longer than the last, and they found themselves talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and comfortable silences. Yates was different from any man she had ever known. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and he valued her opinions. He made her laugh with his dry humor and impressed her with his work ethic. She watched him repair fences and break horses with a patience and skill that spoke of years of experience. He was gentle with the animals but firm, and they responded to him with trust. One afternoon in late August, Felicity was sitting on the porch of the ranch house, hemming a set of curtains while Yates worked nearby on fixing a broken gate. The heat was intense but bearable in the shade, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sage across the open land. "Can I ask you something?" Felicity said, breaking the comfortable silence. Yates looked up from his work. "Of course. Why did you really help me? I know what you said about your mother, and I believe that is part of it, but I feel like there is more to the story." He set down his tools and walked over to sit on the porch steps, close enough that she could see the dust on his boots and the sweat staining his shirt. "You are right. There is more to it." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "When I was 20, I was working a drive in Kansas. There was a girl in one of the towns we passed through, about my age, with red hair and green eyes not unlike yours. She was kind to me, brought me lemonade when I was working in the heat, and we talked for hours. I thought maybe I was falling in love with her." Felicity felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, but she stayed quiet and let him continue. "Her name was Margaret, and she told me her father had died and left her with debts. A local businessman, much older than her, had offered to marry her and settle everything. She did not want to marry him, but she felt trapped. I wanted to help her, but I was just a cowboy with barely enough money to buy a new pair of boots. I told myself I would come back when I had saved enough, that I would find a way to free her. His voice grew rough with emotion. By the time I returned a year later with money in my pocket and hope in my heart, she was already married to that businessman. I saw her once from a distance, walking down the street with a baby in her arms, and a look in her eyes that told me she had given up on everything that mattered. I never spoke to her. I just rode away and promised myself that if I ever got another chance to help someone in that situation, I would not hesitate. Felicity set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him on the steps. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "I am sorry." "That must have been painful." "It was," he admitted. "But it taught me something important. Life does not wait for us to be ready. If we want to do something good, we have to do it now, not someday when it is more convenient." She squeezed his hand, and he looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Yates, I need to tell you something. When you paid off my debt and gave me my freedom, you also gave me something I did not expect." "What was that?" "Hope. Not just hope that I could escape Mortimer Graves, but hope that there are good men in the world. Men who keep their promises and care about more than just themselves." She paused, her heart hammering. "I think I am starting to fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Yates turned fully toward her, and his free hand came up to cup her cheek. "Felicity, from the moment I saw you standing in that crowd, I felt something I have never felt before. At first I told myself I was just helping someone in need, but the truth is, I could not stop thinking about you. Every time you smiled, every time you laughed, I fell a little harder. I did not want to say anything because I was afraid you would think I had some ulterior motive, that I had helped you because I wanted something in return." "And do you," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "want something in return?" "Yes," he said honestly. "I want you to choose me, not because you owe me or because you feel obligated, but because you want to. I want you to love me the way I am falling in love with you." She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft press of lips that quickly deepened into something more intense. His arms came around her, holding her close, and she felt safe and cherished in a way she had never experienced. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I choose you," Felicity whispered. "Not because of what you did for me, but because of who you are. I choose you, Yates Zimmerman, and I will keep choosing you for as long as you will have me." His smile was radiant. "Then I am the luckiest man alive." They sat together on the porch steps as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The desert stretched out before them, vast and untamed, but it no longer seemed threatening. It seemed full of possibility. Over the following months, Felicity and Yates built a life together. She moved into the ranch house after a simple wedding ceremony attended by a handful of townspeople who had become friends. The marriage was nothing like the one Mortimer Graves had tried to force upon her. This was a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, a union that grew stronger with each passing day. Felicity continued her seamstress work, taking orders from people in town and nearby settlements. Yates focused on building his horse ranch, carefully selecting breeding stock and training young horses to be reliable mounts. His reputation for fair dealing and quality animals spread, and soon he had more business than he could handle alone. One evening in early spring of 1879, nearly a year after their first meeting, Felicity stood in the kitchen preparing dinner when Yates came in from the barn. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and kissed the top of her head. "I have been thinking," he said. "That sounds dangerous," she teased. He laughed. "I want to make this official. I want to give you something I should have given you when we got married." He released her and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a gold ring set with a single emerald that matched her eyes perfectly. "I know we did everything in a rush, and we did not have time for all the traditional things. But I want you to have this as a symbol of my love and commitment. Not because you were forced into anything, but because you chose me and I chose you." Felicity felt tears spill down her cheeks as he slid the ring onto her finger beside the simple gold band she already wore. "It is beautiful. You are beautiful, Yates Zimmerman, inside and out." They held each other in the fading light, and she thought about how different her life had turned out from what she had expected. A year ago, she had been facing a forced marriage to a man who saw her as property. Now she was married to a man who saw her as an equal, a partner, a woman worthy of love and respect. That night, lying in bed with Yates' arm around her, Felicity said, "Do you ever regret it, spending so much of your savings to help me?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "Best investment I ever made." "I am being serious." "So am I," he said, turning to face her in the darkness. "Felicity, you gave me something more valuable than money. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, a reason to put down roots and stop running. Before I met you, I was just existing, moving from place to place without any real purpose. You gave me purpose. You gave me a home." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into that kiss. They made love slowly and tenderly, and afterward she fell asleep with her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The seasons turned, and their lives settled into a comfortable routine. Spring brought new foals and the hard work of training. Summer brought heat and dust and long days that ended with cool evenings on the porch. Fall brought cooler temperatures and the satisfaction of a successful year. Winter brought snow to the mountains and quiet days spent indoors, working on projects and planning for the year ahead. In the summer of 1880, Felicity discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment he looked stunned, and then a slow smile spread across his features. "A baby," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "We are going to have a baby," she nodded, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the horses in the barn. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully as if she might break. "I am sorry. I should not have done that. Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Can I get you anything?" She laughed at his sudden nervousness. "I am fine, Yates. Being pregnant is not an illness. But yes, we are going to have a baby, probably in February if my calculations are correct." He pulled her close and held her gently. "I am going to be a father. I cannot quite believe it." "You will be a wonderful father," she assured him. "You are patient and kind, and you already care for animals with such tenderness. Our child will be lucky to have you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Yates became even more protective and attentive. He insisted on doing the heavier chores and fussed over her constantly, bringing her tea and making sure she rested enough. Felicity found his concern endearing even when it became a bit overwhelming. In February of 1881, during a snowstorm that blanketed the desert in white, Felicity went into labor. Yates rode through the storm to fetch the midwife from town, and then paced the kitchen anxiously while the midwife and a neighbor woman attended to his wife in the bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, and Yates wore a path in the floorboards with his restless walking. Every cry from the bedroom made him wince, and he wished desperately that he could take her pain upon himself. Finally, just before dawn, he heard the thin wail of a newborn baby. The neighbor woman emerged with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Zimmerman, a big, healthy boy, and your wife is tired but doing well." Yates rushed into the bedroom to find Felicity propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face glowing with happiness. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and when Yates approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal a red-faced infant with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Meet your son," Felicity said softly. "I thought we might name him Richard after my father, if that is all right with you." Yates reached out with a tentative finger and touched his son's tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers curled around his, and Yates felt his heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. "Richard Zimmerman, I like it. Hello, Richard. I am your father, and I promise to do my best to be worthy of you." Felicity smiled, exhausted but content. "He is perfect, is he not?" "You are both perfect," Yates said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." The early months of parenthood were challenging but joyful. Richard was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them awake at odd hours and demanded constant attention. Yates proved to be a natural father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with his son when colic struck in the middle of the night. Felicity marveled at his patience and his obvious love for their child. As Richard grew, he became the center of their world. He took his first steps in the ranch house parlor, holding on to furniture for support while Yates and Felicity cheered him on. He said his first word, which was horse, because he spent so much time watching his father work with the animals. He was a curious, energetic child who brought laughter and occasional chaos into their organized lives. One afternoon, when Richard was about 2 years old, Felicity sat on the porch watching Yates teach their son to pet one of the gentler horses. The boy was fearless, reaching up with chubby hands to touch the horse's soft nose while Yates held him securely and spoke in soothing tones. She thought about the marriage contract that had once threatened to destroy her life, and about the cowboy who had bought it and set her free. She thought about Mortimer Graves, who still ran the bank in Piatch, but who avoided them whenever possible. She had heard through town gossip that he had tried to force another young woman into a similar contract, but her brothers had banded together and repaid the debt before Mortimer could carry through with his plans. Perhaps their story had inspired others to stand up to his manipulations. Yates walked over with Richard on his shoulders, the boy squealing with delight at being up so high. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, sitting down beside her while Richard played with his father's hat. "I was thinking about how lucky I am," Felicity said. "About how different my life could have been if you had not walked into it." "I was thinking the same thing," Yates admitted. "I came to Piatch looking for land and a fresh start. I found so much more than that. I found home, I found purpose, I found love." Richard grabbed at his mother's hand, babbling something in his toddler language, and she pulled him onto her lap. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not confronted Mortimer that day? If we had never met?" "I try not to," Yates said. "It is too painful to imagine. But I will tell you this. I believe we were meant to find each other. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was luck, but either way, I thank God every day that I was in the right place at the right time." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence while Richard dozed off in her arms. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and she felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. In the years that followed, their family grew. In 1883, Felicity gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, a delicate girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair. 2 years later, another son arrived whom they named Thomas. The ranch house that had once seemed spacious now felt wonderfully crowded with the sounds of children playing and laughing. Yates expanded the horse ranch, hiring on a couple of young cowboys to help with the increased workload. His reputation for breeding and training quality horses spread throughout Nevada and into neighboring states. People traveled from hundreds of miles away to buy his stock, and the ranch became prosperous beyond their initial dreams. Felicity's seamstress business also thrived. She taught Caroline to sew, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her, and together they created beautiful garments and household items that were in high demand. But she always made time for her family, insisting that dinner be a time when they all came together to share their days and enjoy each other's company. One evening in the fall of 1888, after the children had been put to bed, Yates and Felicity sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. They were both older now, marked by sun and wind and the passage of time, but their love had only deepened. "Do you remember," Felicity said, "when you told me that you were giving me the freedom to choose you?" "I do," Yates said. "It was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I was afraid you would choose to walk away." "I could never have walked away from you," she said. "You saved me, Yates. Not just from Mortimer Graves and that awful contract, but from a life without love, without hope, without joy." He took her hand, the hand that still wore the emerald ring he had given her so many years ago. "You saved me too. I was lost before I met you, just drifting from place to place without any anchor. You gave me everything that matters." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert and the occasional nicker from the horses in the barn. Finally, Felicity said, "I want you to know that I would choose you again, every single day. If I had to make that choice 1,000 times, the answer would always be yes." Yates pulled her close and kissed her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their first kiss so many years ago. "I love you, Felicity Zimmerman. I loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you," she whispered against his lips, "always and forever." The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. Richard grew into a fine young man who shared his father's talent with horses and his mother's kind heart. He eventually took over much of the daily operation of the ranch, allowing Yates to step back a bit and enjoy his later years. Caroline became a skilled seamstress who expanded the business and even opened a small shop in Piatch. Thomas, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a love for books and learning, eventually becoming a teacher in the local school. Yates and Felicity became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree branch out and flourish. The ranch that Yates had purchased with his trail savings became a legacy, passed down through generations, a testament to what could be built when love and hard work came together. On a spring evening in 1905, Yates and Felicity sat on the same porch where they had spent so many evenings over the years. They were both in their 70s now, their hair white and their movements slower, but their eyes still lit up when they looked at each other. "We have had a good life," Yates said, reaching for her hand. "We have had a wonderful life," Felicity corrected. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you ever think about that day, when I bought your contract and told you that you were free to choose?" She smiled. "I think about it often. It was the day my real life began. The day I learned that freedom is not just about escaping something bad, but about having the power to choose something good." Yates nodded slowly. "I have never regretted that decision, not for a single moment. You were worth every penny and so much more." "And you," she said, squeezing his hand, "were worth choosing. You are still worth choosing every single day." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange, Yates and Felicity sat together in peaceful contentment. Their story had begun with a contract that tried to steal her freedom, but it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting through the courage of a cowboy who dared to do what was right and the love of a woman who chose to open her heart. The marriage contract that Mortimer Graves had tried to force upon Felicity still existed somewhere, tucked away in a box in the attic, marked with the word "void" in bold letters. But it no longer held any power over her. It was nothing more than a reminder of what she had escaped and what she had found instead. She had found freedom. She had found love. She had found Yates Zimmerman, the cowboy who bought her contract and gave her the most precious gift of all, the choice to build a life on her own terms. And she had chosen well. Their children and grandchildren continued to thrive, carrying forward the values that Yates and Felicity had instilled in them. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a physical reminder of what could be built from a foundation of love and mutual respect. The story of how Yates had saved Felicity from a forced marriage became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as an example of courage and kindness. In their final years, Yates and Felicity remained devoted to each other, their love undimmed by time. When Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Felicity mourned him deeply, but found comfort in the knowledge that they had shared a lifetime of happiness. She lived another 3 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, sharing stories and wisdom accumulated over a long and fulfilling life. When Felicity finally joined Yates in eternal rest, she was buried beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple headstone that read, "Felicity Kincaid Zimmerman, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She chose love and was loved in return." The ranch continued to prosper under Richard's careful stewardship, and eventually passed to his own children. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original porch where Yates and Felicity had spent so many evenings remained unchanged, a sacred space where family members still gathered to watch the sunset and remember the couple who had started it all. The story of the marriage contract and the cowboy who bought it became more than just family history. It became a symbol of hope for the entire community, a reminder that one person's act of kindness could change the course of a life and create ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could imagine. Years later, when Piotch celebrated its centennial, someone proposed naming a street after Yates and Felicity Zimmerman. The proposal passed unanimously, and Zimmerman Avenue became one of the main thoroughfares through town, ensuring that their names and their story would never be forgotten. The bank building where Mortimer Graves had once held power eventually closed, replaced by a more modern financial institution with transparent practices and fair lending policies. Some said that the example set by Yates Zimmerman had helped shift the town's culture away from exploitation and toward fairness and community support. Whether that was entirely true or not, it was undeniable that Piotch had become a place where people looked out for each other, where debts did not define a person's worth, and where love was valued above profit. The ranch itself became a landmark, visited by historians and tourists interested in the Old West and the stories of the people who had shaped it. A plaque was installed near the entrance, telling the story of Yates and Felicity in brief but moving terms. Visitors would stand and read it, then look out over the land that stretched toward the mountains, trying to imagine what life had been like in those early days. But the true legacy of Yates and Felicity Zimmerman was not found in plaques or street names. It was found in the lives they had touched, in the example they had set, in the love they had shared so openly and generously. It was found in their descendants, who carried forward their values of kindness, courage, and integrity. It was found in the very soil of the ranch, where generations had learned to work hard, love deeply, and always do what was right even when it was difficult. The marriage contract that had once threatened to destroy Felicity's life had become, in a strange way, the catalyst for something beautiful. Without it, she never would have stood in that street watching Yates confront Mortimer Graves. Without it, Yates never would have had the opportunity to act on the values his mother had taught him. Without it, their paths might never have crossed, and the love story that inspired so many might never have happened. Sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, and sometimes freedom comes not from escaping our circumstances, but from someone caring enough to help us change them. Yates Zimmerman had cared enough to risk his savings and his plans for the future to help a stranger. Felicity Kincaid had been brave enough to accept that help, and then to open her heart to the man who had given her back her life. Together, they had built something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. They had created a family, a home, a legacy of love that continued to touch lives long after they were gone. They had proven that one act of courage and kindness could change everything, that love freely chosen was stronger than any contract, and that the best things in life could not be bought or sold but only given and received with open hearts. As the years turned into decades, and the decades turned into a century, the story of the cowboy and the woman he freed from a marriage contract remained a source of inspiration. It was told to children as a bedtime story, to teenagers as an example of true love, to young adults as a reminder that doing the right thing always matters. And somewhere, in the whisper of wind across the Nevada desert, in the starlight that shone over the Zimmerman ranch, in the laughter of children playing in the same house where Yates and Felicity had raised their family, their love story continued. Not as something frozen in the past, but as something alive and vital, a testament to the power of choice, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of love that is freely given and gratefully received. They had started with a contract marked void and built a love that was anything but. They had taken a moment of crisis and transformed it into a lifetime of joy. They had proved that the best love stories are not about perfection, but about choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through all the challenges and triumphs that life brings. And in the end, that choice, made freely and maintained faithfully, was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind.